They called him a savior of the economy, but behind his billions was a silence paid for with blood. Bayo Adekunle was not elected, yet every president answered his calls. His name moved through Aso Rock like a whisper, never announced, never denied. He owned oil blocks across the Niger Delta, private jets registered in foreign names, and bank accounts that stretched from Zurich to Dubai. Newspapers celebrated him as Africa's richest man, a patriotic investor who believed in Nigeria when others fled. What the headlines never said was how government money disappeared only to reappear inside Bayo's empire, washed clean through inflated oil contracts, ghost refineries, and shell companies registered in countries Nigerians would never see. Each administration arrived with promises, each left with excuses. Bayo stayed, untouched, richer than before. This story is not about oil alone. It is about how silence becomes currency and how an entire nation can be bought without a single vote. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, or outside Nigeria? And please, like this video and subscribe, because stories like this are rarely told and even more rarely remembered. The Niger Delta burned endlessly. Gas flares lit the night sky like artificial suns, drowning villages in heat and smoke. Rivers once clear enough to drink from now carried thick black oil that clung to skin and poisoned fish. Children learnt early not to swim where their fathers once had. Every year, the government announced compensation for environmental damage. Every year, billions were approved, and every year, nothing changed. The money flowed into accounts managed by companies Bayo secretly controlled. Militants were paid to protect pipelines. Soldiers were deployed not to protect people, but profit. Bayo called it necessity. Progress requires sacrifice, he often said. In his mind, the suffering of forgotten communities was unfortunate, but inevitable. Nigeria was not a country for soft hearts. Or so he believed, until the ghosts began to grow louder. Kola Adekunle once believed every word his father spoke. As a boy, he admired the long convoys, the respect in men's voices when Bayo entered a room. Wealth felt like proof of righteousness, success like destiny. That belief shattered the day Kola stood among protesters near one of his father's oil facilities. He watched soldiers fire into the crowd. He watched a woman fall, clutching her chest, blood soaking into the soil that made his father rich. That night, Kola packed a single bag and left Nigeria without goodbye. For 10 years, silence replaced family. Bayo called his son weak, poisoned by foreign morals. Yet in quiet moments, alone in mansions too large to feel warm, Bayo wondered why all his money could not buy back one boy who had walked away. President Danjuma came to power on the language of reform. Nigerians celebrated cautiously, hardened by disappointment but hungry for hope. He promised transparency, justice, and a new era. His first real meeting, however, was not with parliament or civil society, but with Bayo. They sat behind locked doors, drinking expensive whiskey while discussing stolen billions like chess pieces. Bayo offered experience, the president offered loyalty, the nation was never mentioned. By morning, the machinery of corruption was humming again, smoother, quieter, more efficient than before. In a small London apartment, Kola received an email with no sender name, only numbers, accounts, dates. Nigerian oil revenues traced through foreign banks. One name repeated endlessly, Adekunle. As Kola studied the ledger, numbers became faces, burned villages, empty classrooms, hospitals without medicine. He finally understood the truth his father had buried under luxury. Their wealth was not inherited, it was taken, and it had been paid for with lives.
Kola returned to Lagos under the disguise of reconciliation. Newspapers framed it as a prodigal son's homecoming, and Bayo played his part perfectly, smiling wide, arms open, forgiving without questions. Cameras flashed as father and son embraced at the airport, an image meant to suggest unity, legacy, and peace. But beneath the public warmth was calculation. Kola watched everything: the men who bowed too low, the security detail that never relaxed, the phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Lagos overwhelmed him: the traffic, the noise, the sharp contrast between wealth and suffering, but it also sharpened his resolve. He had not come home to heal wounds, he had come to understand the full size of them. Bayo's mansion stood like a fortress overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, its marble floors cold even under the sun. Politicians arrived only after dark, slipping past gates guarded by men who carried rifles without uniforms. Inside, deals were made in low voices over expensive drinks. Money moved without documents. Promises were sealed with handshakes. Ministers left richer, quieter, and more obedient than before. Kola noticed how nothing was ever written down because everyone already understood the rules. At night, alone in his guest room, Kola recorded names, faces, patterns. The house was beautiful, but it felt like a grave built above secrets.
Kola traveled south to the Niger Delta without informing his father. He met widows whose husbands never returned from protests, fishermen whose nets pulled up oil instead of fish, former militants who once guarded pipelines in exchange for silence. When he introduced himself, reactions varied. Some laughed bitterly, some cursed his bloodline. One elderly man stared at him for a long time before saying, "Your father eats, so we bury our children." That night, Kola could not sleep. For the first time, guilt felt inherited, and heavier than any inheritance of money. Back in Lagos, Bayo hosted a lavish charity gala for displaced communities. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above guests dressed in silk and gold. Speeches spoke of hope, rebuilding, and compassion. Kola watched donors applaud, unaware or unwilling to know that the money pledged would never reach the victims it was named for. The marble floors reflected light beautifully, but Kola imagined them soaked red beneath the shine. When Bayo hugged him afterward and whispered, "This is how the world works," Kola realized his father truly believed it. Kola made his decision quietly. From a secured laptop, he sent the first batch of documents to international journalists, anti-corruption watchdogs, and foreign investigators. He did not sign his name. Across oceans, editors froze as they read. The scale was too large to ignore, too detailed to dismiss. Back in Lagos, Bayo felt it before he saw it. A tightening in his chest, a shift in the air. Silence, the weapon he had mastered for decades, was beginning to fail him. The first headline appeared quietly, buried on an international website late at night. By morning, Bayo's phone had not stopped ringing. Old allies spoke carefully now, their voices cautious, their loyalty suddenly conditional. Power, Bayo realized, had begun to shift. He summoned Kola to his study, a room lined with books he had never read and awards he had never earned honestly. There was no shouting, no anger, only disappointment. Bayo spoke of survival, of how nations were built on ugly compromises, of how idealism had ruined better men. "You think truth saves people?" Bayo asked softly. "Truth gets people buried." Kola met his father's eyes and answered, "Then we have been living on graves."
The second exposé landed like thunder. Names were printed, accounts traced, documents verified. International media began asking questions Nigerian journalists had been too afraid to ask for years. Radio stations buzzed, social media exploded. Some Nigerians defended Bayo, calling the reports foreign propaganda. Others felt something dangerous and unfamiliar: validation. For the first time, their suffering had receipts. Silence, once Bayo's greatest shield, shattered publicly. And when silence breaks, it cuts both ways. President Danjuma addressed the nation with practiced calm. He denied wrongdoing, promised investigations, and urged patience. Behind closed doors, panic ruled. Ministers deleted messages, Files disappeared. Old alliances turned toxic. Bayo was offered escape, private planes, safe countries, negotiated exile. He refused. Running would mean admitting guilt, and Bayo Adekunle had never admitted anything. If he was going down, he would stand where everyone could see him. Kola's name surfaced. Anonymous threats followed. Unmarked cars lingered outside his apartment. Friends urged him to leave Nigeria before it was too late. Every night, he replayed memories of the Delta. Faces burned into his conscience. Fear followed him everywhere, but guilt followed closer. If he ran now, the truth would die quietly. So Kola stayed. Courage, he learned, was not the absence of fear, it was choosing which fear to live with. Protests erupted first in the oil-producing regions. Fishermen marched. Mothers carried photographs of sons who never came home. This time, the world was watching, and cameras captured what bullets once erased. Soldiers hesitated. Orders came late. Some refused entirely. The Delta, long ignored, had found its voice. And as chants echoed through poisoned creeks and broken roads, Nigeria shifted, just enough to scare the men who had fed on its silence for decades. For weeks, Nigerians waited for the image they had been trained to expect. The handcuffs, the police convoy, the fall of a giant. Investigative panels were announced. Anti-corruption agencies released carefully worded statements. Television analysts spoke endlessly about accountability. But Bayo Adekunle was never arrested. His gates remained closed, his guards unchanged. Justice circled him like a cautious animal, close enough to be seen, too afraid to strike. The law, it seemed, knew where power still lived.
And in that absence of punishment, many learned the most painful lesson of all: exposure is not the same as justice. Though untouched by handcuffs, Bayo felt his empire weaken. International banks froze accounts, foreign partners suspended projects, invitations stopped arriving. The same politicians who once praised him now avoided his calls. Money still surrounded him, but influence leaked away quietly. His name no longer opened doors, it closed them. For the first time in his life, Bayo experienced something worse than poverty: irrelevance. At night, he wandered through rooms filled with art and silence, realizing power only exists while others believe in it. One evening, Bayo asked Kola to sit with him on the balcony overlooking the sea. The city lights flickered below like fragile promises. He did not accuse, he did not threaten. "Was it worth it?" Bayo asked, his voice thinner than before. Kola answered after a long pause. "Ask the mothers who finally feel seen." Bayo said nothing. Some truths arrived too late to be argued with. Bayo never left Nigeria, yet he no longer belonged to it. Public events excluded him. His name was spoken carefully, always in the past tense. Young activists used him as an example of what rot looked like. He remained rich, untouched by prison, but stripped of honor. The country he once controlled now studied him like a warning sign. And that, perhaps, was his real sentence. Schools debated the scandal. Radio hosts spoke boldly. Students quoted leaked documents like scripture. Fear did not vanish, but it weakened. Nigeria was still imperfect, still wounded, still dangerous for truth-tellers. But something irreversible had happened. The silence had been broken, and once a nation hears itself speak, it can never fully return to quiet. Kola knew there would be no peace after the last truth. Still, he agreed to the interview. It aired late in the evening, his voice steady, his face tired. He named names, traced money, and explained, slowly, carefully, how a nation had been robbed without guns. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with exhaustion. "This is not about my father," he said. "It is about a system that rewards silence and punishes conscience." By morning, the interview had spread across continents. There was no space left to pretend ignorance. The night after the broadcast,
Bayo collapsed in his bedroom. The man who had survived coups, scandals, and betrayals fell alone on a marble floor he could no longer rise from. Doctors arrived quickly. Machines hummed. Money paid for the best care available. But bodies, unlike systems, do not negotiate forever. As he lay unconscious, the empire he built continued without him, proof that even giants are temporary. Bayo awoke days later, unable to speak properly. His hands trembled. His eyes, once sharp, now searched the ceiling as if looking for faces no one else could see. Kola sat beside him. There were no apologies, no forgiveness, only presence. Sometimes, closure is not absolution. It is understanding the weight of what cannot be undone. Bayo wept silently. It was the first honest response of his life. Bayo Adekunle's funeral was grand. Politicians praised his contributions. Clergy spoke of mercy. Expensive cars lined the streets. Outside the gates, protesters gathered quietly, holding photographs of the dead. No shouting, no violence, just memory standing opposite ceremony. Two Nigerias faced each other that day, and neither blinked. Years passed. New scandals emerged. Old habits returned. But Bayo's name remained a reference point, a warning taught in classrooms and whispered on radio. Nigeria did not become perfect, but it became less silent. And sometimes, in broken nations, that is how change begins. Not with justice, but with remembrance.